Hey everyone, it's Ben Hardy here, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about the long-term resale value of the Ram TRX and the Ford Raptor R. And the question I want to answer in today's video is whether or not these trucks will actually be future collectible items, basically. Before we get into the video though, as always, if you want to save time and money the next time you purchase a car, link to my car buying guide in the description down below. Let's get right into it. So if you're watching this video, then chances are you already know what the Ram TRX and the Ford Raptor R are. See what I did there? That was kind of weird. Anyways, they're both crazy high-performance off-road trucks with supercharged V8s under the hood. And they're all about, obviously, tons of horsepower, tons of off-road capability, and they are like the definition of excess in today's world because they're both extremely expensive, they get horrible gas mileage, and, well, they're probably like the definition of horrible emissions, right? Because of their powertrains and everything. And obviously we're going away from that because everyone is going towards smaller engines, hybrid powertrains, and fully electric powertrains, frankly. And so these trucks probably aren't going to be around for too much longer. And so that's led a lot of people to speculate on these trucks and say that these are probably going to be future collectibles. And so I want to basically get into the reasons as to why these could be and could not be future collectibles, basically. So first off, we have to talk about what actually makes cars collectible. One reason is just rarity, right? It's pretty self-explanatory. People want what other people can't get a hold of. Now, this doesn't guarantee that a vehicle is going to be collectible, but if a car is rare enough, typically people will pay some sort of price premium for it in the future, right? A really good example is all of the cars that Carroll Shelby modified, right? He didn't modify a massive amount of cars, but any car that he touched is worth tons of money now. Now, another reason why a car could become collectible is because it takes a snapshot of a particular time period that people just see as iconic, right? A really good example is muscle cars before the whole oil crisis situation, right? These muscle cars had big V8s, tons of horsepower, and like were the definition of excess, and people just really romanticize those cars in that time period that those cars were built in. And so again, they're worth a lot of money. And a lot of these cars, frankly, weren't necessarily rare when they were produced, right? They were produced in pretty large numbers, but again, they take a snapshot of a particular time period that people love. Now, another reason why a car could become collectible is because of the driving experience it provides that you just can't get in a modern vehicle. A really good example of this is cars that were produced in like the late 90s to like just before 2010. A lot of these cars were kind of like the bridge between old school cars and modern cars that use tons of computers and technology. You know, some of these cars did have, you know, some computers and some technology, but they still were analog enough that like you had this driving experience associated with them that like you felt like you were kind of like part of the car and all that kind of stuff. Whereas like now, again, cars have so many different computers and so much technology that you really are taken out of the driving experience. And so a lot of these cars now in that time period are starting to shoot up in value a massive amount. I mean, look at like the Porsche Carrera GT, the Ford GT as well. Like any high performance car from this era has just been, it doesn't even matter what it is, it seems like they've all been going up in value because of the driving experience that they provide. And so then I guess the ultimate collector car is a car that takes a snapshot of a time period that's really rare and then also gives like a special driving experience. And I think a good example of that would be like the McLaren F1. I've obviously never driven one, but that car is worth a massive amount of money because, again, it takes a snapshot of a particular time period. It has a crazy driving experience, and they are extremely rare. So now let's relate this over to the Ram TRX and the Ford Raptor R. So with the Ram TRX and the Ford Raptor R, let's first go over the first bit of criteria, right? And that is rarity. Now with the Ram TRX, it is not necessarily rare today because Ram is producing as many as people want. Now if we look over at the Ford Raptor R, it is going to be pretty rare. Ford is producing less than 3,000 for the initial batch, and I doubt that production will ever be at a higher amount compared to that. Look at the Shelby GT 500. Ford never built that many of those, and so I doubt they're going to build a ton of Raptor Rs. They're probably still going to focus on EcoBoost Raptors in terms of production and just build as many Raptor Rs as they really want to build. And so if we look at things from that perspective, right, the Raptor R definitely looks like it's going to be the more collectible option because it's going to be more rare because less units are going to be produced of that truck compared to the Ram TRX. But if you look at the bigger picture, both of these trucks are pretty rare overall in terms of production numbers. So if you look at just Ford, they produce almost 1 million pickup trucks a year. And a lot of the other truck makers are producing at least 500,000 pickup trucks a year, right? That's a lot of vehicles. And the Ford Raptor R only having, less than 3,000 units built for the initial run, and the Ram TRX having I think less than 30,000 units built total is such a small percentage of the truck market. And so in the overall picture, both of the trucks are actually relatively rare, even though, like I said, it's pretty easy to get your hands on a TRX in today's market. Now, the next thing is that whole capturing a snapshot of a particular time period thing, and I think both of these trucks perfectly do that, because we are literally at the pinnacle for off-road performance, in my personal opinion, because after this point everything's going to be hybrid or fully electric, and so it's just going to be a different type of off-roading compared to what we get just in today's world, right? And so with the Ram TRX and the Ford Raptor, right, they both have big supercharged V8s, crazy suspension, right? Now, in terms of actual off-road racing, they're not technically long travel suspension, but in terms of compared to regular road cars, they are long travel suspension. So there's just a lot with those trucks that just makes them crazy, unlike anything else on the market. And so they capture the snapshot in time where we have trucks that have over 700 horsepower that you can buy from the factory with a warranty that are just crazy. And we're really never going to get anything else like this. It's kind of this time period is the muscle truck time period, right? Again, pre-oil crisis in the 70s, right, you had the muscle car time period. Again, this is now the muscle truck time period, and it'll definitely be remembered for ages to come, I suppose. We'll see when people forget, right, when trucks are viewed like how we view chariots today, right? And then the next thing is going to be driving experience. And this is another thing that both of these trucks definitely capture. They definitely have a super unique driving experience, again, that is unlike anything else on the planet, both from an on-road and especially from an off-road perspective. Now, I know a lot of people that buy these trucks never take them off-road, which is a shame, but that's where these trucks really shine. And again, that unique driving experience definitely could be worth something in the future if people want to experience, again, the sound of a big supercharged V8 and just the feel of the suspension and everything through, like a high-speed desert run or whatever. It's definitely something that is an experience. So it looks like these trucks will be future collectibles, but now let's get into why they could potentially not be future collectibles. So the first thing going against both of these pickup trucks is the fact that they're pickup trucks, right? They're not sports cars. I know it sounds weird to say, but most collectible cars are like sports cars and supercars. Now, if you have looked at auctions over the last few years, there have been a ton of trucks and SUVs that have sold for big amounts of money. So this isn't necessarily like an end-all be-all thing, but it seems like the majority of vehicles that go into that whole collectible section end up being sports cars and supercars. And the reason I think that is because utilitarian vehicles just typically aren't as cool. I don't agree with that because I think they're awesome, but I think from a collector's perspective, it's a lot cooler to have a Ferrari than a souped-up Ford pickup truck, right? And then on top of that, with these supercars and sports cars, you can enjoy them without causing tons of damage to the vehicles. And what I mean is, if you're a collector that actually drives your collection, then you can just go in and get, let's say you have a McLaren F1. You can get in that car and you can go and, maybe rip it up and down a canyon a little bit and go home and completely fine. But with the Ford Raptor on the Ram TRX, they're only really fun to drive off-road. And there's a lot of variables off-road. There's a lot of wear and tear that happens off-road. And I don't think that someone that would have these trucks as a collector car would take them off-road. I mean, frankly, most people that buy these trucks today don't take them off-road. And so that whole thing where I talked about how it would give you this fun driving experience only really applies to off-roading that wouldn't happen if this was a collector's car, basically. And so it kind of, again, it puts these trucks in this weird category. That being said, though, I mean, they're big trucks with massive tires and a big V8. And, I'm sure in 50 years from now, people would love to be able to cruise down the boulevard and just flex to everyone that they have this big V8 powered truck while everyone else is driving jets and mobiles, right? And so it's kind of a weak argument, but I still needed to bring up that point in today's video. Now, the biggest thing that is going against both of these trucks is the fact that you might not be able to drive them in the future. And what I mean is we are going through a transition unlike we have ever seen in the past. In the past, all these different examples that I mentioned where we went from one type of car to another type of car, we were going from internal combustion engine cars to internal combustion engine cars. Whereas now we're going from internal combustion engine cars to electric cars, two different ways to power a vehicle. And so I don't think it's too crazy to see a future where there are no gas stations, there's no drilling for oil, and there's no way to fuel a vehicle that has an internal combustion engine, right? Who knows when that'll happen or if it'll ever happen, but I don't think that's too crazy, especially considering the fact that almost every single automaker is pushing EVs hardcore. Governments are pushing EVs hardcore. Like everything is going in that EV direction, right? And so you could be left in a situation where you just paid a crazy amount of money for this supercharged V8 truck, kept it for 30 years, and then it ends up being worth nothing because you can't drive it and nobody else can drive it. And I mean, think about this. Maybe we're going to end up crunching all the internal combustion engine cars and using those parts to build even more EVs. Again, it sounds crazy now, but in 30, 40 years, who knows at this point? And so with that kind of weird, it might be dystopian to some of you, future mentioned, here's what I'd have to say about the Ram TRX and the Ford Raptor in terms of being future collector vehicles. And I first got to say, this is not financial advice. This is just my ideas on these trucks. And that is, I think that they have potential to be collectibles in the future if you can still fuel them at a reasonable price, right? I think that there will still probably be ways to potentially fuel vehicles in the future if we completely get rid of oil drilling with synthetic fuels. But at the same time, I think those synthetic fuels are going to be produced at such a low rate and such a high cost just to produce them that it's going to be unaffordable to anyone that's not a bajillionaire in the future, right? And so you have to be willing to take that, what's essentially a gamble that you'll still be able to drive the vehicles. And so there's potential, but then I think, again, like I said, I think it's a huge downside that's going against them. The other thing is that I'd have to say from an advice perspective is I just would focus on speculating on these vehicles in the short term and not in the long term if you're going to choose to speculate on these vehicles. You guys know I'm all about actually driving the vehicles and enjoying them, right? But I understand that a lot of people are buying these because they know that there's crazy market premiums on them, that they can drive them for free for a few months and then sell them for more than they paid for them, right? And that's what I would focus on. I would not be buying a Ram TRX or a Ford Raptor R with the intention of making a ton of money in the future because, again, we're going through a transition unlike we have ever seen in the past. And so I don't know if it's, again, this is just my idea. I don't know if it's worth it. And so how I see it with the Ram TRX, for example, is they're selling at MSRP or under MSRP with a lot of dealers, and used, you can sell them for over MSRP. And so I would go in it buying a TRX with a mentality that you're basically going to drive that truck for maybe a year or two and probably sell it for what you paid for it, or maybe even make a little bit of money. Now on the Ford Raptor R side of things, this is where things are a little bit more complex, but basically there's obviously crazy market adjustments with most dealers in the Ford Raptor R. Some dealers are selling them at MSRP, but most dealers are doing $25,000 to $50,000 over sticker. I don't think that's sustainable for that particular truck. There's a lot of people that will argue with me on this, but if you look at every single Raptor in the past, including modified Gen 1s that were supercharged, they just they hold their value, but they don't keep those massive market premiums that they had when they were initially released. Right now, we have a ton of hype behind the truck because everyone wants it. But once that hype dies down, the prices will come down. The same thing's already happened with the Gen 3. When the Gen 3 was initially released, it was going for $20,000 to $30,000, sometimes even $40,000 over sticker. Now, there are still pretty big market premiums on the Gen 3, $10,000 to $20,000 over sticker, but they're a lot smaller than when it was initially released. And so what I see with the Ford Raptor R is a similar situation. It's probably going to initially be sold for $25,000 to $50,000 over sticker, and then it's going to get pulled all the way down to probably $10,000 to $20,000 over sticker. And then, once these supply chain issues free up and everything starts to calm down, I would not be shocked if that truck ends up being a used vehicle that's being sold at MSRP or even under MSRP in the future. As special as it is, I think these vehicles are eventually going to just go through normal depreciation. And so, yeah, that's just my thoughts on it. Do whatever you want to do, whatever you think is best. But if it was my money, which obviously I have a Gen 3 Raptor and I have a Ram TRX, then I would be buying those vehicles at the right price to where I would be able to make money in today's market and not speculate that I'm going to be able to make a ton of money in tomorrow's market, because Frankly, I don't think that money exists. Let me know what you guys think on this, and I will see all of you in the next video.